Welcome to COM 300. This is our module on the history of rhetoric. And I can guarantee one thing, it will be historic. Our objectives today are to recall key figures of classical times, explain how they perceived and developed the art of rhetoric. Secondly, to summarize the central concepts of classical rhetoric, including some definitions, some types of proof, types of discourse, and the rhetorical canons. As always, the working vocabulary is available to you. It might help you in doing the assignments, and you will be responsible for this vocabulary on the quizzes. So who are the Sophists, and what did they do that impacted the development of rhetoric? What were some of their big ideas? Well, Greece at that time was a birthplace of democracy. The system was shifting from people in power who had parents that were in power and were given titles and given wealth. The power was kind of shifting in society to public forums, and as a result it became important that you were an effective public speaker. That was how you were able to contribute and participate in the democracy. Now, it wasn't a democracy like you might think it is today. Only, white, elderly landowners were allowed to vote. But just that change from inherited wealth and power to something that you could have an effect on in a public forum was fairly significant. Strong public speaking then became the sort of avenue towards public power. And the Sophists, well, they were traveling teachers. They would come to town, they would set up shop, and they would say, if you pay me, I will educate your children to be effective speakers. Or in some cases, pay me and I'll write a speech for you regarding a case or an issue before the public forum. They claimed to be able to make the weaker argument the stronger. The Sophists said we could take a really weak argument and we can make it stronger. So they're important philosophical ideas. There are two that I'll talk about here. The first is that man is the measure. What this really means is that there's a level of subjectivity because every person has a particular view of what truth is. So you might say, this is a pen. But no, to me, it's a magical wand. And if you push this button and push down, it makes marks. You see a pen, I see a magic wand. That's what's meant by the idea of man is the measure. The second point is that every argument had two sides. So they were skeptical of capital T truth, because for every argument that can be made, there are two sides to that argument. So the first idea or principle introduced relativism and subjectivity, and the second idea introduced a skepticism about the truth of one side. So what did Plato think about the Sophists, their occupations, and their relationship to truth? Well, it's been very interesting. A lot of what we knew about the Sophists came through Plato's dialogues. And since he didn't like them, then that kind of colored things in what we understood to be sophistic argument and philosophy for a long time. Plato felt that the Sophists were deceivers, making the weaker argument the stronger. Two main themes emerged from Plato's dialogues. One was taking money to create a truth is absolutely horrible. It's heinous, right? Shouldn't be done. Rhetoric, Plato argued, was just a knack. It's like cooking, and it's not a true art. Well, hosts of cooking shows might disagree, but his point was that rhetoric is not really an art. The second idea or theme that emerged is that rhetoric can be used but only in the service of truth. So, you may know that Plato thought that the rulers of society should be the philosopher kings. They would use a Socratic dialogue back and forth, sometimes called dialectic, and they would arrive at a truth, something Plato felt existed with a capital T. This is a truth. Well, once the philosopher arrived at a truth, then rhetoric could be used to package it and send it to the masses. So you have the truth here. I'll put some ribbon on it. I'll put a pretty little bow on it. That's the rhetoric that will then help sell that truth to the masses. Aristotle. Aristotle was the great systematizer. If you read his works, you'll see that he lists 7 of this, and 3 of that, and 5 of this. So he created a lot of systems. Well, his definition of rhetoric is a classic one: the art of discovering the available means of persuasion in a given case. The ability to see what is possibly persuasive in a particular situation. So if you have a situation like you want to appeal a grade, or you want to convince your friends to go out to dinner, then can you mobilize all the available forms of persuasion to give the most effective appeals? Rhetoric is also defined by Aristotle as the counterpart of dialectic. Here's from Aristotle's Rhetoric. What dialectic is for private or academic practice of attacking and maintaining an argument, rhetoric is for the public practice of defending oneself or accusing an opponent. So for Plato, remember, dialectic is primary. We get that truth, and then we use rhetoric, which is subsidiary, to convey that truth. To Aristotle, it's more like this. They are the counterpart of each other. And dialectic is what happens in private or academic discussions, and then that gets translated into a public sphere by rhetoric. And so rhetoric is really more of a counterpart than a subsidiary or a subordinate. What is an artistic form of proof, and what are the 3 major artistic proofs? So an artistic proof is one, basically, that's created. Let's contrast that. An inartistic proof is like a fact, or something that exists, that is incontrovertible, or sometimes support that might be coerced, or if you use torture to create support. None of those are created and voluntary. And so inartistic includes things like the fact of the sky being blue, or a law that exists, or a contract that exists, or if you're tortured to say you're in favor of something, or coerced or somehow. But the artistic proofs are created, they're invented. And the 3 artistic proofs, you've heard them before, are ethos, pathos, and logos. They're the invention of ethos, appeals to credibility, pathos appeals to emotion, and logos appeals to logic or reason. We'll talk a lot more about them in future modules. Aristotle also created the first genres or types of discourse. So let's start with deliberative. Deliberative rhetoric is in a place where you are deciding policy. So Congress, a state legislature, a school board, all of these are areas where public policy is decided. And the things you talk about in deliberative rhetoric are the advantages and disadvantages, the costs and the benefits that might accrue. And we say might because deliberative rhetoric is about the future. It's what's going to happen. Will we get these benefits in the future, or will these costs occur in the future? Forensic rhetoric occurs more in judicial settings, a courtroom or potentially other situations where you're deciding whether a person is guilty or innocent. So what happens in forensic rhetoric, much like you see in the shows CSI and Bones and so forth, is accusation and defense. We get an idea of whether a person is innocent or guilty of something that happened in the past. So that's the time frame for forensic. It's mostly about what happened in the past. Finally, the third form of discourse that Aristotle talks about is epideictic. It's kind of a mouthful, but it basically means some kind of a ceremonial speech, or a speech where you're primarily praising or blaming someone. One example might be a eulogy. We gather to celebrate, to mourn someone who has passed, and we praise them. We talk about what was good in their lives, what did they stand for, and we take those values, those lessons, and we apply them to ourselves now, in the present. Other kinds of ceremonial speeches include things like a speech on Memorial Day or a speech on the 4th of July. These are speeches of occasion, but we are praising or blaming something, and we are taking the values that are represented by the occasion and internalizing them now in our lives right now. So that's it. Deliberative is about costs and benefits and policy, and it's for the future. Forensic is about guilt or innocence, and it has to do with accusation and defense, and it's about what happened in the past. And epideictic is a ceremony speech or praising or blaming something, and it pertains to taking those values or those understandings into our lives right now. What are the 5 canons of rhetoric? Is there an easy way to remember them? I'm going to give you them in an order: memory, arrangement, invention, delivery, and style, which is language use. So, M-A-I-D-S, maids. The canons are here to serve you. I was a maid for one summer when I was a young adult, and I can tell you that it was one of the most educational experiences of my life, and I learned a simple truth that summer. Some people are pigs. It's been helpful to me all along in my life, and I've used my cleaning skills many times over the course of a lifetime. So when we talk about the 7 canon elements, remember that invention is the 3 forms of artistic proof: ethos, pathos, and logos. So when I say pick 3 of the canon elements to analyze for your paper, I'm basically meaning these 7 elements: ethos, pathos, logos, arrangement, delivery, style, and memory. Those are the classical canons, and again, we'll be focusing more time on them as we go through the semester. So post this. We know that the types of discourse, we can find those in our society today, right? Deliberative, policy, forensic, judicial, and epideictic occasion. But I'm interested in how ethos and pathos and logos are evolving, particularly in social media. Can you give an example of how the standards for credibility, the emotional appeals, the logical appeals have changed in social media? And do you think this is positive or negative in your view? And while you're there, comment on some other posts as well. This concludes our historic module on the history of rhetoric. Have a great day.